carry on the series of the albums. And the first 4 albums I spoke about, which I love or have influenced me or I've talked about, is number 1 was Michael Jackson's Thriller, number 2 was Marvin Gaye's Here My Dear, number 3 was Forever Changes by the group Love, and number 4 was Inner Visions by Stevie Wonder. My 5th album I'm going to talk about, which has influenced me as a musician and things I love, is Bjork's debut album, or debut, this debut. Now, people may not understand that though this was Bjork's first solo album, in the influential she does in the 90s. She'd obviously had a career with a group called the Sugar Cubes, and then she also had done an album in 1979 when she was like 10 or 11. I have heard it, it's not brilliant. But anyway, this album, released in 1993, so 30 years old. So, why Bjork? People would think, God, why not some, like, an older artist, something. Well, there's a reason. This album is very good. Very influential to me of the idea of listening to sounds and coming up with new ideas. And the whole thing with Bjork was she came out kind of nowhere for me. She did the actual first time I ever heard her was, I remember there used to be a thing called the Album Chart Show on ITV, and I heard this track called Playdead, and it was for I can't even remember the film. I remember this voice and this orchestration, and I thought, wow, this artist, there's something about her voice just so, like, different. And so I was kind of just like, okay, well, I'll be ready. And I remembered her name. So anyway, I got to hear about this artist, and they said she's got an album coming out. And I was like, cool, who's this? So first thing I do when I get the chance, being only in 1993, I was about 12 years old. And went and bought this, and I got it on tape originally and got it on vinyl, and actually this vinyl's worth a bit of money now because it's only the first of versions they didn't print many of. Most people bought CDs at that time in the 90s, so I did actually buy a CD but didn't have a CD player until 1995. So with Bjork's debut album there was some wonderful things. As soon as I heard it on the record and I got it on tape, I was absolutely hooked. Bjork did these wonderful ideas of these soundscapes and all these ideas, and you've got this kind of like angelic jazz voice on top of these kind of very weird percussive ideas. So Human Behaviour's kind of got this like these really unusual rhythms. It's kind of like when you're a child and when growing up at like 11, 12, when you're trying to do music production, you're kind of thinking all these ideas of what can I come up with, which is really quirky or interesting. And Bjork to me was this very influential character, and I've always been into mainly solo artists, so Bjork was kind of unusual because I like Michael Jackson, who was very much had all the money to do production, but to me Bjork's was more, it felt like she used the 4 tracks, she used this minimal production. When you're growing up learning music and music production, you kind of don't have all that equipment. So Bjork influenced me a lot in my musicality and my music composition, and the idea of how you can use minimal ideas to create effective sounds. Also what I love about is her vocals. I think her lyrics are very interesting. Some people say they don't understand her, but I find she's quite easy to understand. And she's got this kind of quirk to her. I don't like using the word eccentric because I don't think she is eccentric. I just think she's a great artist. Visually, music videos are amazing as well. But like Human Behaviour, she's talking about this idea of how we have to work out human behaviour and why do people act a certain way. And again, these really interesting ideas, which when in the 90s, people weren't really talking about them things. They were like, most pop music in the 90s was dance music. Dance was very influential, rave music and the rest of it. But Bjork kind of used them ideas to come up with and then to put them into pop music, which was catchy, but it wasn't over commercial. It was sort of like arty, and I think she's really good at that. So Human Behaviour is a great track, and I think if you ever watch the video of it, it's quite interesting, and just this kind of quirk of who she was. Venus as a Boy, which is this kind of like plonking, which I thought was she was playing on milk bottles, and this dun-dun, And you hear this and you think, did she actually get milk bottles and tap it? Again, kind of gives you this quote. Actually, it turns out it's a sample from a Japanese record I found out later on in life. But again, it's just these ideas, and then this, the song Venus as a Boy, so it was kind of like this idea of being ambiguous. Sorry, I was trying to say the word right. And with Bjork, she kind of pushes them boundaries of kind of understanding and trying to be free and creative and not being restrained or restricted to a certain ideal. And Venus as a Boy I loved. I thought there's just this great rhythm, and then she's singing about this idea of someone who was a boy who was kind of feminine or had some feminine traits but still was masculine. And as a child growing up, I kind of had that thing. I was always felt I was a bit more feminine or arty, different to the kind of the idea of what we saw in the 80s of this macho man, into the 90s, where, you know, the idea is there was very much this divide of what a woman was and a man was. It was kind of changing, but it kind of still was there in cultural conditioning. And I thought Bjork kind of didn't do that. So, you know, this sort of thing with Bjork, she kind of came across quirky, was introverted, but as a person, you know, if you ever saw her interviewed, she kind of was kind of like, you know, very shy and all this, but, you know, her music, she was like a powerhouse. Like, she could be the biggest extrovert ever. And I tell you, if you've got any chance of any art you should watch Bjork live, because she's fucking amazing. Then we also go into other ideas of like there's more to life than this, and it was recorded live at the Milk Bar Toilets. So the Milk Bar was actually found out it was supposed to be a very popular bar in London, and you get this when she's singing, she does that, and then in the halfway of the track she rushes to the toilet, and then she sounds like she's in a cubicle, and again very quirky ideas, and then she comes out to this big, like, you know, this big dance party and everything, and again very unusual. You know, nobody really done something like that. It was kind of very, you know, very outward, very like, again, gives you this visual element. If it was a music video, it was kind of obvious, I suppose. But to do that as a track was kind of unusual at the time. Like Someone in Love, like I said, she has this jazz thing, and again, Like Someone in Love is an original jazz track. And she does this with It's So Quiet on another album as well. And this kind of how she can show her ballad chops and just show her range as well. Big Time Sensuality is this kind of like very much a dance song, bit poppy, bit upbeat. I also remember it because of this thing of where she was on a back of a trailer truck, and I always thought that was quite interesting, because I remember once a friend of ours used to deliver coal, and I remember once he asked me to once so I could stay on the back of the truck, and this was kind of very dangerous, and my mum knew about it, she'd go ape shit. But it's just this idea, and I just thought it was kind of a quirky idea, and I just thought Bjork was always sometimes really, really pushing it out there visually, but also just with musically as well, how she would, you know, she'd sing about things. Sometimes people used to think she sang about nonsense, but she didn't. It was quite interesting. The second B-side, probably, I would say, is probably not so strong as the A-side, but that's not to say it's awful. But, you know, One Day, again, this ballady, Aeroplane, Come to Me, again, these ballads. So, again, Bjork always shows these kind of balladic ideals, which is also, you know, contradictory to the upbeat dance songs. And then she's got Violently Happy again, where this is upbeat as well. So, with this debut album, I was also, the next album I'm going to talk about is a Kate Bush album, and I was always an admirer of Kate Bush as a kid growing up in the 80s, and it was kind of weird because, you know, most people in the 80s, I mean, growing up, they would like, you know, mainstream artists, maybe like Madonna, people like that, but I was always into like the interesting. I mean, Michael Jackson was commercial, but not always everybody liked him, but most people did. But I was always interested in the unusual artists who was push boundaries, and Kate Bush did that. And with that kind of experimenting and interesting ideas, writing good songs, wanting to be a songwriter, I kind of liked that. And I think with Bjork, she was kind of that in between Kate Bush, and then she was in between who would become the next artist to try and do that, which was Fiona Apple and Tori Amos. But with Bjork, what I love about her work is still as an artist is that she still is pushing boundaries. She never just sits on her laurels, and I think she's an amazing artist in just, if you ever want to know about different time signatures, stretching her ability, changing production styles, using unusual sounds, Bjork does this. I would never say she's conventional, and I would probably say with her later albums, with a lot of people who do like her music, would probably say her music is less conventional as she's got older. But to me, the debut album is very important because it's actually the album where people saw her on a larger level and then hopefully grew with her. And I think most people like Post, or they like Vespertine, or they like other albums of hers, but I just find this album has something which is where the songs are so strong and the production is more minimal, where it's not so overbearing sometimes. So that's why I like this album more.